to The Collective, where every conversation ignites a new perspective. Join us as we delve into the journeys of remarkable individuals, explore the art of growth, resilience, and the power of a shared mission as we strive to be better together. Hey everybody, welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am super pumped about this one. We got Seb returning, we got Gino here, we got James here, Sean, myself. We're going to be talking about faith. And I got so many points here. My book is almost full already. So let's get into it. But before we do that, let's get some intros done. Seb, how's the mountains treating you?
Good, brother. Just had a good workout with the missus, and I'm spent and ready to go.
Bam. I love it. Doc, Gino, how's life down in Florida?
Brother, life is phenomenal, man. Very blessed, very privileged. My babies are growing way too fast. 1-year-old, 4-year-old. Time's going by a little too quick for me. But everything is good. Getting ready to go on vacation for a week and take them for a little fun in the sun. So looking forward to it.
Bam. I love it. James, how is it out east?
Good. Yeah, my son just graduated high school. My wife just graduated medical school. And we are also taking a week to go on vacation a week from now on a cruise. So very excited about that.
Bam. I love it. Sean, how's life out in those mountains?
Things are good here. Looking forward to this conversation. Been looking forward to it ever since you let me know that this was the topic this week. So, I mean, the panel is awesome. I think we'll be able to hit on a few different areas that I'm intrigued by. I'm still on my own little personal journey of faith, spirituality, and religion. And so this isn't a one and done set piece for me. I'm looking to evolve in this conversation. So, let's shoot up the fireworks.
Well, speaking of fireworks, I actually forgot something right off the bat because I was so excited to get in the show. I hope everybody else is too. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails when we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. If you have any thoughts or questions or comments or anything else, put them up in the comment section. We can hit those throughout the show as we do normally. So let's go around the table. One quick, real... Bleh. My brain is fried. Let me hit these first. Comments. John Minari, morning team. Good to see you. Jassa Aja, good morning. Good to see you. We got Ricky Yanko in on the Instagram side. Everyone's here. Let's dive into it. I want to get your guys' first thoughts on faith as a topic, just in general, and then we can dive into everything else from there. James, you're on the bottom. Let's start with you. What do you got?
This is going to be an interesting conversation because I was raised Church of England by not very religious parents, so I was exposed to it. So when it comes to organized religion and faith, there was that. And I've just been on this really interesting journey of faith, and my faith has never gone. The label maybe is skewed a little bit. But yeah, I mean, I've become very ambiguous when it comes to how you would describe my perception of faith, but it's never faltered in itself. So this should be a really interesting conversation today.
I agree. This is going to be good. Gino, what are you thinking?
So much here, man. So much here, in the best of ways, right? Look, this is a topic that's got so many different tentacles of association, and one in which I've been very honored and privileged to speak to on several accounts regarding spiritual fitness, right? And particularly with the U.S. Armed Forces. But there's a lot for us to unpack with this. On the substance side of it, which you guys will see in this conversation, that's a big thing as far as the tip of my spear, right? That the substance of things hoped for, there's a lot within that of itself when we are talking about faith, evidence as well, right? Of things not seen, and kind of combining those two things together and what that means and how we navigate our lives, whether we're talking about it in a spiritual context or not, right? I mean, there's a lot there from a tangible perspective for us to unpack, but also the intangible is equally as important, if not more.
Most of my thought process throughout all of my research here and all my questions and stuff have been on intangibles and things that we can't quite see, can't quite figure out, can't quite prove. There's always just a little inkling in the back of our brains. Seb, what are you thinking on your first thoughts?
I don't know. It's like juggling with hand grenades, but it'll be interesting to see It'll be interesting to see what comes out of this. One of the things that I was thinking about is the first incline, of course, is the associated to religion, but there is so much more depth to faith than that. And I think that, having that natural, and even for me internally, having that little resistance, I don't really want to have that conversation because I don't really want to shake things around, and it's an interesting position to be in because I know that's what needs to happen. And it certainly is invited. And even though it's uncomfortable, it needs to happen. There's an interesting piece with humans, and evidence is a very interesting concept because sometimes we need overwhelming amount of evidence where there is a zero deniability of absolutely anything else, and other times we'll go on with no evidence whatsoever and we'll jump on a bandwagon and be 100% involved. And so even from a relational standpoint, if you talk about having a conversation with somebody and then something hasn't been said, but all of a sudden in your head, all these things have been said, but those things were never said. And you also have zero evidence that the person actually considered this or is thinking that way. And now you're making up this outcome that you are projecting on the person on account of the things they didn't say that you have made up. So now you're gonna jump on something and really give a lot of weight to what it is that you feel and think. But yet, if there's a reasonable amount of evidence on something, now you need an unreasonable amount of evidence. So it's going to be an interesting conversation. I look forward to it.
There's going to be so much going back and forth. This is going to be awesome. Sean, what are you thinking?
I didn't make a ton of notes, but I did do some thinking this morning. And it's not like this is new thought for me. I've been thinking on this subject for quite some time, more than a day or two. And I'd like to break it down into three distinct components. And it's not that they're insulated or isolated from each other. They have like a Venn diagram overlap for sure. But the three words that I'd like to just kind of establish right away is faith, spirituality, and religion. And so it's not that they're three completely different things. It's just that I think that rather than intermixing the words casually or carelessly, I think I'd just like to establish my idea of what those three things mean. And so for faith, for me, that is my faith in myself, in my inner world, in the lived life that I have lived, and my faith in my ability to continue to live in a way that I understand. So there's the faith in me, the faith inside of me. And then there's the spirituality. And these are my definitions, no one else's. I mean, we can tweak these all day long, but just want to establish something. So the spirituality for me is that more than me. It is the greater than me. Faith is me. The spirituality aspect is external to me. And that's I love the spirituality aspect because it's that mysticism. It's that mystery. Like if I really focus on my own inner faith, then I can get some clarity on it over a period of time. But spirituality, on the other hand, is still mystical and to some degree magical. And it's kind of like the little hobbit stepping out of their front door, wondering what's beyond the mountain. To some degree, that mysterious world that we over the years unfold or may never unfold, that's really appealing. And then religion, for me, is a structure, is a framework that can help a person maybe understand their faith, maybe understand their spirituality, and maybe understand others around them. That commonality of spirit, of gathering, of conversation, of swapping ideas. I think religion isn't just a moment in a church. I think it's also a moment with a friend who has a structure called religion. And if I don't have that structure called religion, they bring something to the conversation that I typically don't get. So I think that my faith and my spirituality seeking can lead me in and out of religions, as it were. And so I hope that kind of clears up not my stance, but sort of a loose definition around these words that I know for sure on the sidewalk every single day throughout the world, they're often swapped casually with no sense of their meaning to the person.
This is a great place to start, actually, and I think we can. I want to pass around the table just on the delineation of it. Not the definitions or the personal beliefs on it, but the ability to separate those three aspects. Let's talk about that. Doc Gino, you got any thoughts?
So, beginning in the context of religion, right? That is, there is an organized structure, right? To how, historically speaking, to how and why that came about, right? When we start talking about the spiritual side, right, which I wholeheartedly believe that makes up a pivotal component, if not one of the most important components of human identity and identity management. That's a transcendental experience, right? And we're talking about something that is intangible. And it's something that has a lot of substance. And when I say substance, meaning that it has a lot of weight in what it is that convicts us to do something or not do something, right? It's a guiding light for us. Whether we can explain it or not or understand it, that's up for debate, right? But the feeling, right, that affects and influences the posture of your heart, which can have a very real effect with neural circuitry and the way in which the mind works, and how that will lead you to make certain decisions and certain interpretations in your life. That matters, right? And meaning making matters a lot, right? And so being able to embody that experience outside of a religious perspective is an important thing. It's interesting. So when you look at like confidence, for example, right? So what is confidence, right? So if I were to ask each of you, do you have confidence in the love that you have, right? For your family, for your friends, right? For your comrades? Undoubtedly, each and every one of you, you're going to say, yes, of course I do, right? But when you break down confidence, right? What are we saying? Confide, right? In Latin, right? With faith, with belief, right? How do you define that? Well, what's the substance of that thing? What is the substance of that belief that you have and the trust in the other person that would convict you to take action to do something for them? Whether it's you picking up something they dropped or you stepping in front of them to take a bullet, doesn't matter, right? It's still this idea there's something propelling you, something you can't touch, right? That has a lot of power, a lot of significance. And quite frankly, it's fascinating within the human condition, right? And one of the biggest things where I take this particular discussion to is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you look at Maslow's pyramid, right, the very bottom level of that pyramid, right, it's physiological needs, right? So, food, water, proper temperature, all the things that our bodies need, right, to be able to survive, right, the environment. The challenge with that, right, is that that doesn't accurately describe what a human being first needs when it enters this world. The very first thing a human needs when it enters this world is another human being. Right? Because a newborn cannot do all the things to provide itself with the proper physiological needs to stay alive, which means the very first mental model that has meaning behind it, which is then rooted in faith, which constructs this idea of belief and trust, right, is another human being, right? And that's a very special experience because that is where trust is first built. This idea of tribe, this idea of having a sense of belonging and who it is that can provide what it is that I need. But we often lose that, right? And that's why a conversation like this, when we talk about faith, right, the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, that's why it's incredibly complex, right? And I don't think that there's one right answer to it, right? I mean, as far as being able to unpack it, because there's so many different interpretations. But I will tell you historically, from a cross-cultural perspective, whether it's the Greeks, the Romans, the Hindus, it doesn't matter, right? Like you have got interpretations of this and applications of it on the spiritual and the religious and on the physical and on the faith side that varies. But there is also elements that bring them together, right? Which very much describes the posture of the human heart. That was a mouthful. Sorry, guys.
Bam. Just dropping mics right off the bat. We're 15 minutes in. This is awesome, James.
I'm here for it. All right. Throw rocks at me. What do we got?
James, what do you got?
You expect me to follow that?
Yeah, actually, I do.
I'm going to be like super surface level. I just want to add on that, kind of disregarding what you initially told us, just to layer on Gino's response. When you look back in history, and you look back at the kinds of cultures that were thriving versus the ones that maybe ended up with genocide and all kinds of other things, it was whether you actually see your fellow man or woman and you almost, as we talked about in the professions that we've shared, value them more than yourself at times, that's the ultimate community, whether it's within a church, whether it's in a village, whatever the thing, a military unit, a fire station. And so what a beautiful insight, because you're absolutely right with the hierarchy of needs. I never thought of it that way. But yeah, when we plop out, we're not exactly God's most genius creation when it comes to newborns. Deers can get up and run away. Babies just kind of laugh as they're getting eaten, So yes, we do need other people, but that never changes. In Sebastian Junger's work, when you talk about tribe and tribalism,
That's right.
and tribalism's almost got like a nasty connotation to it at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But the true tribalism, and that's funny we're having this conversation, because I was literally thinking about this the other day. The moment that you identify as your political party or your religion ahead of your humanity is when we get in trouble.
Big
But
time.
if you initially see yourself as a human, part of this incredible cornerless sphere that we all inhabit, which is part of something, as we're going to get into, we don't understand, but we trust and we believe. The moment we disconnect from the very shared experience, that's when we get in problems. And just to underline what Gino said, if the other person, the man or woman to the left or the right of you, or your parents, or your child in other cases, isn't the first person, the most important person, I think that's where we get in trouble. And the moment I becomes more important than we fall apart as a community.
This is gonna be good. I can't wait. Seb, what do you got?
Seb has left the chat.
Okay.
So I'll build up on that, since that was an absolutely incredible foundational pitch there, Dr. G. So when I'm looking at the needs to be with people, and you're looking at the actions that are currently ongoing in the world, what we are doing is two things. We're dividing, because that is easy to do. It's easier to do than to work together. And it actually, even though it's seemingly easier, evidently it isn't, because it comes back and bites you in the rear. But one of the things that we do to achieve that is to prioritize the individual, prioritize the self, right? And as soon as you start prioritizing the self, then you start looking at siloing these different various branches, in my opinion, because those things are actually quite interconnected. And I don't think that there is a clear line. This is where spirituality start. This is where faith start. It just doesn't work like that. All of those things are interconnected, and they're extremely dynamic in their application. And you would be hard pressed to know when you cross from one to the other, because really it's one of the same. But I do believe that humans have a tendency to silo for two reasons. A, we're trying to simplify things so we can make sense of them. And if it's really simple, then we're good. We can generally negotiate that. But if it's too sort of, it's too nebulous, it creates issues. And if it, again, nebulous, because we believe by sight and not by faith, right? And so we try to keep things as simple as possible. Now, for me, I do not treat those three things as separate entities. I treat them all, as intermingled. There are nuances, of course, in each of them, but I try not to do that. And the reason why I try not to do that is my human ways are going to be to judge, are going to be to elevate myself and lower others. It's going to be to shed disrepute on what another person potentially is saying or speaking on account of what it is that I believe in, which is this right here, these two little lines that I stay in between of. And it isn't the case at all. I don't like doing that. I know I have a propensity to do that. I'm going to cut myself short before I do that, to make sure that I have the open-mindedness necessary to have these conversations, but more importantly, to treat people with the right posture when I encounter them on the daily.
Yeah, I'm so digging this so far. Even before we started this conversation, I'd written this down on my book, and it said belief, leadership, confidence, faith, and I put them that they almost equal each other in the fact that they're all somewhat. I do like the fact that you brought up the fact we delineate these things on a regular basis without even conscious thought. We'll try to silo them to, well, there's this and this and this, but really, and I love the fact that you brought this up, Dr. Gino, is you put with faith. Confidence is with faith. It's so you're taking experience and adding a little bit extra. Just this should happen the way I like it. So I'm digging this so much. Sean, coming back to you. What do you got?
So this morning I was playing around with one of the LLMs, large language models, and I threw this into it as a question. And I think one of the more important aspects of this conversation that we're having right now is that before you have the conversation, you've got to think about what you're about to step into, the conversation. And so it's great, because if you've never done a lot of deep thinking before, guaranteed, if you're going to be responsible in the conversation, you've got to do some deep thinking prior. And I think that's great, man. You got to do a bit of homework on yourself. I didn't enter into this conversation blindly and guess that I'd have something to add. Like, I've been stewing on it. And that's why I love these conversations, man. It almost holds you accountable to the stuff that you should be doing anyway. But the conversation never comes up often enough on the interwebs that you got to sit back and hold yourself accountable. So thank you, boys. We're holding ourselves accountable, and I'm gaining the most from it by entering into this right now with AI. I started a little question to it. And what I wanted to do was maybe better understand or loosely categorize myself in order to kind of reverse engineer it, kind of tear it apart to some degree. And so I'm going to give you the question that I asked it to basically describe me, as it were. I'm just pulling it up right now. My apologies. Here we go. If I describe myself as such, I would appreciate your interpretation. Quote, I have faith in myself, the ability to apply personal agency, and strive to do my best both internally and externally, which continually builds on itself, producing more and more positive outcomes. Further to that, I recognize patterns in the world, and I see greater mysteries embedded in the game of life, but I have no formal connection to religion. How would you describe that? So, I'm not that unique. I'm sure there's people like that in the world. So here we go. Just some ideas as to how rich and how complex this subject can be once you start looking at it from a variety of different ancient and modern wisdoms tied together into a 360 called Sean. And I'm just a proxy in this instance of perhaps many people. So I embody existential spirituality anchored in self-faith. Faith in yourself is not ego. It's earned through trust, through personal agency, resilience, continual feedback loops, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on to describe the various things that I am. I'm going to condense all of that right now and just give you kind of like my Venn diagram of how it describes me and why. There's just a handful of things. Stoicism, due to my personal agency, discipline, and resilience. Taoism, based on my pattern recognition, harmony with mystery, and intuitive flow. Existentialism, based on my self-authored meaning and courage in uncertainty. Contemplative traditions, based on my direct inner experiences, presence, and transcendence. Modern humanism, based on my ethical living and meaning without dogma. You draw from all of these, but without becoming any one of them. You're building a faith structure from within, one that evolves through lived truth rather than inherited belief. It goes on, but all of that to say, I'm a representation of many things based on the many things that I bumped into in my life that the N=1 of Sean has found to understand a way his faith and the mysteries of the world, spirituality, and in and out of religions in a way that has put me in this seat right now with these ideas. And I want to just add one more bolt onto that. In respect to religion, when I was out in Cardston hanging out with Seb. Seb, of course, has a more evolved understanding than I do of formal religion. And so while I was with him, I could feel like I was absorbing some of his structured wisdom. I could feel like I was gaining from his journey, his exploration in religion. And so to wrap it all up, I started off with faith. That's how I understand myself. I don't have a blind faith in myself, nor do I have a blind faith in any of my friends. I've got faith in me, and I've got faith in them. And I do believe the faith aspect, certainly for Sean, rules a lot of his life. If I don't have blind faith in Seb's ideas of religion, what I do have is faith in my friend based on pattern recognition over a long time of consistent producing positive outcomes, that I can look at him and understand and also believe that there's something in there for my friend that is good for him, and therefore there's something in it that's good for me. I just have to uncover it, but not blindly. I'll uncover it with faith and time. So that's my thoughts on the complexity of faith, spirituality, and religion from person to person. And as the old saying goes, never judge a book by its cover. I think every single human, we look at their cover and think they're this or that, but I find it to be way more deeper and more complex than that. That's for sure.
So this leads me into my first question here, and I want to talk a little bit about blind faith versus rational thought. And I mean, Seb, you kind of opened up with this as well, was the fact of, does faith require evidence? Or is that the point of faith, is that there is no evidence? Because you can absolutely have blind faith in yourself, and we know people like that. I mean, every one of us knows. We also know people that dismiss faith entirely and have to have evidence for anything. So I want to dive into that a little bit, and I'm going to start with James right now. What are your thoughts on that? Blind faith versus rational thought.
So it's interesting because, again, you know, the issues that we see with most things is when absolutes are forced upon people. So like when Sean was talking about taking a little bit of different religions, the sarcastic voice in my mind was like, well, you need to choose one, you know. And I think the reality is, when it comes to spirituality, there is so much to offer from all these different perspectives from religions, Buddhism, Christianity, you know, Islam, whatever the spectrum is. And I would argue there are some really strong common denominators there that, you know, around the world, people have had the same kind of experience. And then you have the scientific conversation, which is at the extreme. Again, you know, all religion is rubbish. There was a big explosion and then people were made. And in the middle, I think, is this beautiful hand-holding between the two. And you've heard that a lot of the scientific community, if I'm understanding this correctly, used to be very kind of agnostic. And then now, as quantum physics, quantum maths, etc., have progressed, I think there's more of a leaning back into that. One example is, when I was young, we were taught that atoms were made of electrons and neutrons and protons. And then now the microscopes got better and better, and they're like, there's nothing in here. Oh, now what do we do? You know, so now we're back, well, then who made the nothing? And how does that, even exist? And a person I think of, though, when we're talking about faith versus science, you hear a lot of people now, you know, some making a lot of money, talking about, you know, when you first wake up, go outside and get the daylight on your eyes. I've never heard the man who actually discovered that credited, but there's a Oxford professor, Russell Foster, and he had this hypothesis that there was a receptor in the eye that was actually affecting the circadian rhythm. And the ophthalmology, you know, profession laughed him out of conference after conference and meeting after meeting. And he kept kicking indoors, and then ultimately had a rat study that proved it. And he was literally the person that realized there was this kind of chrono or photoreceptor in the eye, not rods, not cones, but a third one. So there was something that pushed him towards proving this before he could ultimately prove it. So I would argue that faith came first, and then the science came second. So when people say to me, oh, you got to show me the science, and another perfect example, in the fire service, people want science to prove studies that a 56-hour work week is less healthy than a 42-hour work week. Well, at what point do we put science up as a barrier because we don't actually want to do the deep thinking that it would be required to just understand, okay, that actually makes sense, full stop. So there's this kind of spectrum of, absolutism, and then, as always, usually the common sense in the middle. But I would argue a lot of science really began with faith, this feeling that there's this thing, there's gravity, there's whatever it is. And then ultimately the science comes along and either proves it or disproves it.
Seb, what do you got?
Yeah, that's a very interesting angle on that conversation. I mean, I spent a great deal of my life as a rationalist. I will rationalize everything, and everything needs. And, for my experience, I'm not speaking on behalf of everybody who's doing that, but for my experience, what it led me into is an overwhelming amount of stuff that I carried on my own shoulders. Something unreasonable, an unreasonable burden of needing and having the answers for absolutely everything that transpires in my life, and having utter control. I used to teach leadership courses and say things you have in your sphere of control and things that are outside your sphere of control. And now I don't even call it that. I call it influence, because that really all you have, And I think that there is, if you look at and again, I'm not bringing in, data to support this. Anecdotally, let's have a chat about, the mental health situation and how it's gotten so bad, but also what is inversely proportionate to that, the amount of spirituality that people engage in. And so there has been a massive, massive drop in that. And there has been a massive elevation in mental wellness issues. Now, this could be a coincidence if you need an overwhelming amount of evidence, or it could be that we're shouldering a lot more than we should be because we don't have that much control over much of anything. And so we need to kind of lay off the gas a bit, So one of the things that I also wanted to address is the fact that, think about a person that that you're having a conversation with or several conversations with, and there's always some sort of friction or something. But that person, if they do not believe whatever it is that you believe in, then the evidence needed to be reasonable for them is an overwhelming amount. Whereas if it feeds into their cognitive biases, all of a sudden evidence is no longer required, or very little of it. And so for me personally, I do like to have evidence. I have a scientifically inclined brain in a non, academic way, but I just like to have evidence. When I was in law enforcement, well, I didn't arrest people because I thought something. I had to be able to prove that, because there are consequences to this. But for me, it's about what is reasonable, and it's the concept of reasonableness. It's not the concept of certainty, and it's not the concept that we need to prove beyond reasonable doubt. Life isn't a court case, and even court cases arguably are not court cases. So we have issues in our systems, both here in Canada and everywhere else, in here in the States and everywhere else. And so I believe that for me, I have to self-impose a burden of reasonable evidence. If there's a burden of self-imposed evidence, and I'm able to make sense of a bunch of things, and I'm able to line them up, then I'm able to look at an outcome and say, this is actually very reasonable. Now, the question becomes, if me buying into this hypothesis making my life better or not? And if the answer is yes, I really don't care what you believe in. The posture of your heart is what I'm worried about. I don't care what you believe in, but are you a good person? What is the symptomology of your belief system? What do we see when we, connect with you? What do we see when people are having and needing you? What do we see when things get tough? That's going to do a lot more talking than any of the posture that you are taking overtly in relation to your spirituality.
I want to go somewhere on this, and it's a bit of a journey here. But so I love where you're going with this, and the idea of adventure picked up into my mind, because you were talking about proof, and when somebody is against your ideas and they need absolute proof, well, there's that means the journey's over. And it reminded me of, I don't know if you guys remember, but back in the day when you would sit down at a pub with your friends and you guys get into arguments and it'd be back and forth and there'd be these debates and so on and so forth. And then phones came out and those stopped because the answer was right there. We could just look it up. Done. Okay. Well, now the journey's over. Conversation's over. Well, now, great. Now we can move on to something else. But if you're not in an adventurous spirit or you don't have that kind of general curiosity about life, you won't pick up anything else. So once you've reached the conclusion, done, sweet, move on. I don't have to do anything else. And this is just, so I think that's part of this game of faith, is that there isn't anything provable about it. There's parts of it that's provable, but you can never come to a full conclusion because that's how the game goes. You have to keep it going. Gino, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Seb, that was really good, man. That was really, really good. So a couple things. So first and foremost, I want to put a book recommendation out to everybody, right? It's called The Fifth Discipline by Peter Sanjay. Highly, highly recommend, for a multitude of reasons, right? But a big thing coming out of that, right, especially in the world of clinical psychology, when you look at, if you were to ask most clinicians, right, what's the point and purpose of life, right? They're going to say to work out of your own narcissism, right? Now, when you really unpack what we're talking about there, where does that start, right? Well, it starts with the first discipline in Sanjay's book, right, which is personal mastery, right? Personal mastery, self-mastery, or however you want to decide that and define that for yourself. But why it is so very important is because it absolutely demands collaborative effort and the culmination of collective consciousness and identity and who you are as a person, right? Why does that matter? Because conviction and evidence does matter, right? Now, what are we talking about? The substance of that evidence, the substance of that conviction. If you were to ask me right now, all right, G, so how is it like how do you quantify, right, the love or the lengths at which you would go to protect your 4-year-old child, right? How do I tangibly present that to you? I don't know. I just know, right? Exactly, right? I just know that I will. I know that I will. And it's without question, right? Well, that's faith, right? There is that is faith in action, right? I can't quantify, but I know it's real, right? Just like the love that I have for my wife, right? Same thing, right? Or my brothers or whatever it is. So, when you really start unpacking this idea of evidence and conviction and what does it take, especially going back to the very first mental model that every single one of us gets presented with, right, coming out of the womb, and this idea of the other and the interaction and the interplay of the other, and the very real difference, right, to your point, Seb and James, right, absolutism versus rationalism, right, and the space that exists. I mean, Viktor Frankl, right, talks about this, right, stimulus and response, the gap that exists there, right, that's a very special place because that's what allows your faith to come into play, right? What is it that you are going to believe in to make a decision, to come to a conclusion, to keep it moving? In a time where in the past 20 years, human beings, 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day is what we are producing. 90% of those thoughts are the same thoughts we had yesterday, and 80% of those thoughts are negative because it's protective, right? We have got stimuli just firing off like crazy. And so we're fielding all this incoming artillery, right? All this stuff, right? Whether it's a social media threat, an actual physical threat, an economic threat, whatever it is. There has to be a rooted belief that is much deeper, that is driving us, right? From an ethos perspective, as a human being, take religion off the table, right? It's a driving force of life that is pushing forward the relationships and the cohesion that you have in your life. So Emily Durkheim, the famous French sociologist, right, back in the 1800s, talks about this collective consciousness idea and collective effervescence. When you start talking about collective consciousness, you're talking about the things that bind you together to create those feelings, those thoughts, those motivations, right, to do things for one another, right, because they feel right. This is what I should do, right? It's code. There's a code that is established. Where'd the code come from in the first place? And it kind of runs part and parcel, James, to what you were saying. Like, from a scientist perspective, like, where did it start? Was it the science first or the faith first, or this idea, right, of I think I can create a light bulb? Now, what would that even look like? That's faith. I'm putting a belief in myself and my abilities to have a vision of what I think it should be. That's substance, right? And that substance is it's an intangible, but it's so tangible at the same time, right? It's just quantifying it, right? Which is what the modern world demands, right? But at the same time, I do think we're having, Seb, to your point, we are having more and more conversations where we do see challenges with mental health adversities on the rise. So then the question there is, okay, but technically, scientifically, we should be way more advanced than we were 30, 40 years ago. And yet there's this consistent uptick in issues. Where's the gap? Because there's a very real deprivation. And so this is injecting even in the U.S. Armed Forces, right? We talk about spiritual fitness. This is where this is coming into play, right? So Martin Seligman's work, who's a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania Positive Psychology Center, he's like, no, we need to have this conversation right now. We're not defining it for you, but we need to talk about the intangible substance, because if not, we are ignoring a massive part of the entire human condition, which absolutely is defined by faith.
Bam. Sean, you got anything to add?
So I believe your initial question was, correct me if I'm wrong, could faith and rationalism exist, or are they so contrasting that they can't coexist? What was your initial question?
Does faith require evidence, or is that the point, that it doesn't?
Right. Well, I've already established that faith to me is faith in myself. Anything beyond me is spirituality, and anything in a framework structure or a construct is religion. And so I either have faith in myself or I don't. And how do you get faith in yourself? Well, you consistently create outcomes that you can form a pattern so that you see the positive direction that you're heading, and you can start buying into that faith in yourself idea. But then beyond that, the aspect of spirituality, believing in something bigger than yourself, believing in your fellow man, though faith and spirituality, as I already stated right at the get-go, are Venn diagrams with overlap. The idea being that I can have faith and trust in myself, but I can do that through the nebulous, the unknown, the intangible. And I can also freaking do it with a cup of science. So science and faith aren't mutually exclusive. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they operate in parallel and they reinforce each other. And so I don't need all science and I don't need all faith. I'll accept both of them in an ebb and flow, a dynamic relationship that unfolds throughout my life. And so I'll quickly establish that I don't see the difference between the two. I don't have to exclude the two. I prefer them to coexist, not even in harmony. I prefer them to coexist with some friction so that it creates novel outcomes for me, so that I feel the dissonance and it grabs my eye. I focus my attention, makes me grit my teeth. Whatever the case is that gets the hook in my brain, in my soul, in my life, in my faith, the mystery. So I do love science and I do love faith cooperatively existing in tension. But then beyond that, within a religion, I think that those things can also exist. And in fact, I think the wraparound of religion or construct of religion or the framework of a religion can create additional ease or additional tension, depending on which way you direct yourself within the religion, how much you hold yourself accountable or not within the religion, or how much you get exposed to new ideas or not within a religion. And so the idea being that you can have faith, you can have science, and you can have religion, and all three of them can create dis-ease or can create ease, depending on which direction you want to take it and how you want to open your eyes or close your eyes. And so your question, Chance, is a good one, but it is so complex and big and uniquely independent to each individual that, someone's got to do a lot of thinking about your question. And if they don't do a lot of thinking about the question, they're going to blurt out a simple, almost meaningless answer. So, it's a good question, but it's a long answer.
we got a couple hours to chat about it, so I think hopefully we'll come to some sort of consensus here. But the thing that when you were talking there, Sean, about the duality of it in general, I put a post out yesterday that really kind of was talking about the duality of it in general. It was talking about to understand the coin, we must dare to flip it, in the fact that you have to take action to do something, but then you have to trust in whatever happens because it's no longer in your control. And I think faith it feels like a very similar idea, is the fact that you have to, like Gino said, you have to have the idea, right? Now, I'm going to do whatever. And to your point, Sean, as well, at some point, you came up with the idea that you could be better than you were at some point. And you had no proof of that up until then. And then from that idea spurred everything else. That's what gave you the evidence to then continue to better yourself in all different ways. So I really
well, it doesn't have to be an idea. Just I want to be really careful with the word, because already someone out there who listened to that is thinking, where's my idea? When do I get the idea? I'd like an idea. And so I don't think it's really about that. It certainly wasn't for me. I just was doing my best to live a better life. And somewhere along the way, I somehow recognized the pattern that this is how it's done. I saw a process for myself. I saw a system for myself. I saw the path forward for me. And so it's not like it came in a bolt of lightning. It was like drip by drip. I recognized it in the past, and I didn't even know that I'd recognized it. It was that slow of a drip. It was that slow of an awakening. I didn't wake up one morning with a blast of light and realize, oh, that's the process. Oh, this is how it works. Bam, now I can do it forever and I'm going to win. That has never entered my mind. It was a really, really slow awakening as to how an enlightenment, a transcendence, if you will, for how I have structured my existence to better understand these things. And so it was never an idea for me. It was a really, really, really slow awakening.
Awakening is a good way to put it, because when we do awake, there's a moment of consciousness, right? You go from being asleep to being awake. But that process takes quite a lot of time. So I'm digging this a lot. Gino, you look like you got something in your mind. What do you got?
No, see, I'm listening to Sean, right? So I think one of the distinctions for me, right? Because so as a behavioral scientist, right, science is a big part, right, of my career and what it is that I do, but also being a person who very much applies faith into everything that I do. I think it's a distinction between how and why, right? And what do I mean by how and why? For me, science has always been a tool to explore, right, where my convictions from faith lead me, right? So that would be the how, right? So how is it that this is happening? How is it that this relationship makes sense or it doesn't? How is it the brain is doing this, but not this? The why part of it, right, is where for me, the faith comes into play, right? It's the anchor point. It's the anchor point of what's driving my motivation. It's the anchor point that can sit there and say, okay, so you want to have a clear understanding of this, because it means something, right? And again, this goes back to meaning making in general, right? And how important that is in the human condition. Because look, if you guys were to send me, when I was first born, if you were to put me on a plane, or excuse me, a rocket ship, right, to Mars, and I'm the only human being that exists there, there's nobody there to witness my existence, to witness my life. What's the value of my life? I don't know, right? I need others. I need a collective, right? To bring that value. So I have witnesses to my existence, because that's the nature of being tribal as a species, right? We put value systems and hierarchy to that. That's why it goes back to the thing I had mentioned earlier about working yourself out of your own narcissism. We have come to a place, right, as a species where it is very much me, 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 me. And we have forgotten the part of how important dependence on one another is, your humanity. Right? Before you put any other label, right, James, to your point, before any other label in your identity comes forth, don't forget the binding element is that we're all human beings here, right? That's the why part. Now, the how part and how we're interacting, now bring in your sciences, right? Whether it's chemistry, political science, social science, I don't care, whatever, right? There's going to be an interaction, interplay in some capacity, right, to the how we are interacting, right? And which is fascinating, because science is that ultimate tool, right, to be able to utilize that. But it all has the anchor point, all right, in my purview, right? And that starts with faith, right? And that belief and that conviction of something that is intangible.
And I just wanted to add, for anybody that was wondering, the fifth discipline I put up in the comment section. If you guys want to hit on those, by all means, it's in there. I actually put a link to Amazon as well if you want to get the books.
Awesome.
I can't wait to read it. It actually looks really.
It's a really good book, man. Really good. It's a staple.
I'm going to dive right in then. I have a couple comments, and then I want to get some more thoughts here. But Jassa jumped in here. He said, I have faith in this too shall pass, which is, again, being able to step away from what you can't control. John Minari jumped in here. He said, I have faith in the brotherhood of service. I live my life guided by the great God of karma. I'm not a religious person, as I'm believing in a dude in charge of everything. There you go. Dan C. jumped in and said, coming from a non-neurotypical person, I need proof to believe. But saying that, I still have faith in the fact that I have no control over much of the world around me. So something else is at work. And I'm just digging this a lot. I say this pretty often, that humans are gregarious by nature, that, you know, we are social animals. We need other people around us. Just like to your point, just to witness our existence. That's a great point. James, you got any thoughts on any of this? Oh, you're muted. Hold on. You got to unmute yourself.
I had faith that I was going to unmute myself, and I was wrong. I actually want to pose a question, if it's okay.
Hit it. What do you got?
Okay, so bearing in mind I spent 14 years in the States working as a firefighter and a paramedic, seeing arguably some of the most desperate men and women and children in the communities. Growing up in the Church of England, you know, environment initially, seeing how various religions play a large part of culture in where I've lived for the last 21 years now. What I struggle with is we are the blink of an eye when it comes to time. And I really feel like these ancient texts, whether they are religious texts, whether they are, you know, Greek philosophy, you know, Theodore Roosevelt and whoever the great minds where there's altruism and they're like, look, next generations, 10, 20, 100,000 generations from now, you need to know, you need to learn from our human experience. How did in 2025 we get to the place where the text, I would argue, I know the Bible the best, the work of the good that Jesus did, arguably out in the community, anointing, the weak and the sick, and being around all the most desperate people, the same kind of people that we were around in the first responder professions. Did we get a culture where you hear more loudly, well, we need to lock up the addicts? Well, Narcan is wasted on opioid addicts, the bums, the hookers, the crackheads, all these terms. Where is the disconnect? Because I have faith in the fact that good people left us wisdom to learn from generations from now. But my perspective, before I put it to everyone else, is that it is interpreted, and everyone has their own individual interpretation of this wisdom. It can be used for good, and you end up being the police officer, the paramedic, the nurse, whoever, who is an anointer and a healer and doing the same kind of thing after the lessons of kindness, compassion, and empathy that we've learned. Or you do the opposite. So rather than, try and offer some elaborate thing myself, how do we get to the disconnect when we truly have a belief that there was kindness, compassion in our ancestors? How do we be the warriors to make sure that that's kept and that's not taken advantage of?
That is a dang good question. I'm going to put it to Seb right off the bat. What do you got?
Curveball galore. This is a really, really interesting question, and I would love to spend an entire episode on it, to be honest. So let me address a few things, and I'm going to try to tie them in properly. And if I can't, somebody else is going to have to pick up the slack, boys. But here's the thing. We stated earlier that individualism is where we're at, and that is an absolute fact, but it's extreme individualism. It's no longer, it's about even the concept of self-love is inflated beyond recognition. And so now that what we have is really pride and ego driven, right? Mm-hmm. And so when that happens, what comes next? Judgment, right? Judgment and all of the things. So we essentially write off what it is that we are seeing on account of what we think is the reason why this is happening. And it's really overinflating our ability to know what the reality of another human being is. And the last thing we want to be doing is to start taking too much credit. And so I'm going to go back to Sean on this, because him and I have had this conversation before, and I'm absolutely not challenging the way that he is thinking. I'm challenging the way that I'm thinking when I think of the way he is thinking. Okay. So for me, for example, I've spent a lifetime taking way too much credit for everything. I just have, I spent a lifetime taking too much credit for the things that I've done, the things that I was successful at, the things that all the evidence, quote unquote, that we are getting of my capacity as a human being. And what I mean by that is it's not that the event actually didn't happen, is what transpired within the event that made me successful or not, taking the credit for that piece, right? And so I'll give you an example of this. I'm on a course, and it's a very difficult course, and there's really high attrition rates, and I'm flying through this course and I'm having a blast, and all of a sudden I hit a certain benchmark, and there's 3 chances to do it, and I'm already 2 expired, and I only have 1 left, and I'm going to be leaving this course on short order if I don't make it. When I stepped up to the line to do what I needed to be doing, I'll let your imagination run its course, I didn't do any of it. I woke up after it was done. Like, that is an actual fact. I was having an out-of-body experience looking at myself doing the deed as opposed to me doing the deed. But when I finished the course, I'm like, yeah, I finished this course. As evidence now contributing to the rest of my journey as what I'm capable of. What I have discounted is what got me through that. What I have discounted is the person that I spoke to midway through the course that told me about their course and gave me a little bit of advice that was able to be operationalized or weaponized during my course that helped me. Now you start tallying these little things that's seemingly innocuous, and they're massive. You had a massive tactical advantage on account of all of the things and the people in this, the way things shake up and line up to make you successful. Taking the credit for being successful is an absolute exaggeration. Why didn't you roll your ankle? Why didn't you run on the rock that was, that was there, and all of a sudden roll your ankle and have a catastrophic break, and you no longer can be the person you want to be? Like, why did the other guy do that? Right? Well, that's not you, pal. You didn't see all the rocks. You're not a visionary that way. And so now, to try to tie this in, if we are feeding pride, which is, in my opinion, one of the worst things that we have as humans, literally, it leads us down all kinds of different paths.
That's right.
Whether it's not working together in collaboration to achieve a medical outcome, and instead trying to build an empire to be the first ones to do it. Now, this problem could have been problem solved years ago, but everybody was worried about who was getting the credit. If we didn't worry about that, where would we be? Right. And so when I look at the state of affairs right now with, the homeless and the people, I think that if you start jacking up the individualism, and if you start jacking up the pride and the ego of the average individual, they're going to look at anybody who's in their mind not as successful as they are, as somehow having been responsible for that outcome. And that is foreseeing or foregoing the fact that you may have had a medical procedure and been prescribed opiates, and next thing you know, you're on the street 10 years from now. There's a lot of variables there. But I do believe wholeheartedly that our society of individualism is creating the issues that we are seeing.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that one. I wrote down experiential interpretation. And so, it's not just about the experience. It's not just about the interpretation, but it's how each of us interprets that experience in and of itself. And so I've seen this many times. I'm sure you guys have seen this many times going through courses where you have people who are almost identical. They come from the same areas. They have about the same build. They have about the same mentality. And you watch one, like you said, Seb, somebody rolls their ankle versus crashes out on a friggin' obstacle. Or I had a dude fall off of an obstacle who was pretty solid troop and just happened to fall off the top. Like, you don't know. And so there's a little bit of luck that plays into all of this as well, which is a piece of faith in and of itself. And that, Murphy's Law states anything that can go wrong will go wrong. But why is that a law? Because it happens all the friggin' time. Right? But there's no real quantifiable say that will happen. I was just listening to a podcast about Midway, the Battle of Midway, and how many bad turns or bad decisions or bad happenstances happened to the Japanese versus the Americans in that fight. And how many, it starts to stack up, but you can't really quantify that that's going to happen ahead of time, and you can't really plan for it. So this is, I'm just loving where this is going. Who else? Who haven't I hit yet? Sean, what do you got?
So the original question, back to, how do we help society, as it were? And I think just through this three simple lenses of faith, spirituality, and religion, if I have faith in myself to make the right choices, positive choices that create positive outcomes, and then I apply the spirituality aspect of the mysteries of the world. So I take myself and I put myself out into the mysteries of the world, i.e., the question, how can I serve this community? How can I serve that kind of a person? How can I help that kind of an institution? I mean, it's literally what we're doing right now. I mean, I swear, it's what we're doing this very second. It's just that we're doing it in our own way. And maybe it's not the right way, maybe it's not the big way, maybe it's not the best way, but it is a way that we are doing it right now. So my faith in myself to gather awesome people to have a moment like this, whether I shaped it or not, that's the spirituality aspect, the mystery of the world. How did we all end up here today, right now, on this topic? That, to me, is the essence of spirituality. Now, to wrap a religion around that, you can wrap a standard issue religion around it as a structure, as a construct, give it a label, or you can just call it like a handful of dudes doing their best right today. That in itself it's its own little form of religion. It just doesn't have a label. It is a community. It is a small gathering of, in this case, men trying to just move the needle a little bit. You know, earlier in the conversation, it was said that, in fact, I believe it was Seb that raised the topic of mental health and why are we struggling so hard right now? It made me consider that, you know, one of the possibilities is that we just came through a rough patch of a few years where people disconnected. But prior to that, people were more connected. They were more community-minded. They were more church-minded. They were more spiritual organization-minded. Every Sunday, you saw your neighbor. Either before church or after church, you hung out, leaned against a fence post and solved the dolphin language and all of that good stuff. Now you're eating pie and the kids are running around and whatever. You're doing your thing and you're getting better as a community. That used to be a thing back in the day. Barns used to be raised. Roofs used to be fixed. Milk used to be shared, but not anymore, or certainly not like it used to be. And so if you have faith that you're a good person and can create good outcomes, and you enter into the mysteries of the spiritual world, as it were, but with people who follow in similar footsteps to create your own little non-labeled religion of just be good people, that to me is what is required right now. Now, religion can offer that for sure. I mean, Seb and Doc G, I don't know what your stance formally is, James or Chance, what your stance formally is in respect to, do you have a label for your religion? It doesn't much matter to me, but I know Doc G and Seb, through tracking what they do, they have a stronger stance of their own personal understanding of a defined religion, as it were. That's probably super helpful. It's not a detriment at all to me. I think that religion, the label, has been distorted to some degree where it's now looked at as a negative rather than a positive. But back in the day, it was just a gathering of like-minded people trying to do good within their community. And somehow I think that's been lost.
What do you got, Seb?
Sorry, guys, I had to jump on that one because it was a perfect ramp, Sean, for me to have that conversation briefly here. You know, in speaking to, and so here's some of the challenges. You get a bunch of guys together. So let's look at the concept of being a good person to begin with, right? So I have faith that I'm a good person. What does that mean? What does that actually mean? Because if I continue to judge people on account of X, Y, and Z, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing this, I have all these sinning ways, and I don't mean it necessarily in a religious context. Let's call this like we have propensity to be negative about things and do certain things and have certain behaviors, right? And so for a person to say, okay, well, I have faith that I'm a good person, well, that might be true. But when that person walked in front of you at the grocery store, you judge them right then and there. That's who you are, right? So yeah, you did some good. It doesn't erase the good that you have done. but the issue and the propensity to overinflate how good we are in this world is a big problem, and that feeds right back into the ego and the pride piece, right? And so when it becomes to sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. Okay, so now you're kind of running into the issue of what framework is going to allow me the real capacity to take a step away from where I'm at and look at my actions and to be able to feed into what it is that I think of myself, or what it is that I'm producing, what it is that, and so I think there's a lot of people that use the fact that they know they're a good person to be an absolute a-hole and walk and that includes people in organized religion. Let's call a spade, right? It does. There is an overwhelming amount of that, and that is a big part of the reason why some people are put off immediately by certain, once we start dividing on account of how much better than everybody else we are, I don't care what you believe in. Your symptomology or your actions are going to speak louder than your words, and you are going to project into the world exactly what you're complaining about. So my biggest issue with this, and I guess the point I'm trying to make here, is that for as long as humans are going to have a real hard time understanding their sinning ways and controlling them from an impulse perspective, it's going to be very, very hard to get 4 people in a group and have all the positive outcomes that we're looking for without a larger framework. It doesn't have to be religion. It doesn't have to be, written on a piece of paper. But if we leave it to the individuals, once pride and ego starts inflating ever so slightly, these behaviors are returning, these behaviors are continuing, and so it's not going to change. And so the person is only going to use the fact that they've spent more time believing that they're a good person than actually being a good person. So now it reinforces as evidence that they're a good person on account of, I've been a good person for 40 years. But you've also haven't looked at all of the things that you could have done better as a human being for the last 40 years, because you have no framework around what that looks like. One of the biggest pieces, and you alluded to it, Sean, one of the biggest revelation for me, and to be honest, I don't care what people believe in. That's totally their prerogative. I'm not trying to impose anything on anybody ever and never have, right? But for myself, what my faith brought me was the ability to be convicted for the things that I do on the daily, that I did for decades, as a matter of course. And take it for granted the fact that I was a good person. I was always there to want to help people, that I was always the first one to, put myself on the line and do all those things, which became evidence that I obviously was a good person. It's the little things. It's the little insidious things that bleed you to death by 1,000 cut that you fail to recognize when you start believing in a self temple, as I like to call it. I much rather have something to calibrate against and be like, hey, man, I thought I was a good person, but the more I look into it, the more all these little things need to be better and be convicted of them.
I'm digging this so much. Gino, what do you got?
So if you guys are cool with it, I want to take a step back just for a second, right? I want to go back to because I have a lot that I want to say with regards to what Seb just said, but also I want to go back to James and the question that he asked, how did we get here in 2025, right? And I think it's really important to recognize a few things, right? So number one is hegemonic influence, right? So when I say hegemony, right, all I'm saying is that a dominant way of thinking that gets imposed upon the masses, okay? Now, why does that matter? It matters because when you look at popular culture and you look at how norms are created, right, within a society, and you look at post-industrial revolution, right? Coming out of the industrial revolution, you had factory lines that were created, right? Factory lines that had this particular component is created, go down the factory line, then another component is created, and another 5, 6, 10 yards, whatever, there's another. So there's this compartmentalization. And now you have employees, right, that are identified as I'm a tire worker, right, or I'm a steel worker, right? And now identification starts to become a very real thing. And it's embodied as this is me and this is what I do and this is why I do it. Why does that matter? The same thing happened, right, in our education system, right? And so you would have math over here, you would have language arts over there, you would have, art over here. The idea, and as time has gone on, we have seen now, I don't know if in Canada you guys have STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, right? It's right. So there's specific schools, right? Depending on where you are as a child, where you go, right? And society will kind of influence where your strengths are, but negates the fact, right? So it's like universities. What is the point of a university, right? Universitas, right? It means the whole, educate the whole person, right? There's a collective to every single individual identity. The moment we started compartmentalizing identity and then labeling people one person or another, instead of having this expectation, like some of the greatest minds that have ever existed, right? Aristotle, Descartes, Kant, take your pick. They were very well versed in many different things, and they understood that their identity was a byproduct of being well versed in many, many different things. That was a staple. You needed to have that to understand the totality of the human condition, to really be able to embrace the ethos of who they are and what it is that they felt they were convicted to do with their time on this earth. The reason why I think that matters is because we have completely lost that, right? James, to your question, how did we get here, right? The further down the line in the world of industrialization and modern technology, right? The further down the line we have gotten into appeasing certain things that we want in our own identity, instead, to your point, because of pride, because of ego, because of, oh no, I am this and I'm the best at this and this is me. When you have no idea, we have no idea who we are, right? Let's just like go back to baseline. We're all consistently figuring that out on the journey of self-mastery and personal mastery. But being able to have that dose of humble pie on a very regular basis. Now this kind of brings us up to what you were just talking about. In my world, right? When I think about faith and when I think about the consistent reminders that I need to bring me back, right, to that zero equilibrium of, hey, dude, get off the high horse, right? You're nothing special, right? That is what faith does for me, right? It is a conviction within my mind to remind myself that, look, pick up your own, in the world of and labeling, right? I am a follower of Jesus Christ. That's what I believe. That is my belief. Okay. And it's not religious, by the way, Sean, right? For me in that world, right? It's a belief system. It has nothing to do with going to a particular church or not that has specific doctrine, right? That has been put together by man. But rather it is a question of, do you guys hear that?
Nope.
No? Okay. Sorry, that's on my end. So long on the short, it is a question of having that consistent reminder of what it is that I am imperfect in, which is everything, right? And being able to reset myself and reset my identity that, look, at some point in history, right, Jesus Christ existed, right? And again, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I'm just sharing my personal conviction, my personal belief on this. And to see how it is, James, to your point, that life was lived, turning the other cheek, being able to do things that pride and ego will not allow you to do within the human condition, right? You have to overcome that. That's it right there. How do you overcome the propensity within internally, right? That's going to push you forward to do things that are not going to serve your best interest and ultimately are going to destroy you. They're going to put holes in your identity, which is going to create disjunctures in the relationships you have with people and ultimately cause a massive disconnection, right? In the relationships that mean the most, being tribal, right? Your tribe matters in a very big way, right? So that for me, kind of full circle, it's a tool that is utilized. It's a huge part of my identity, but how we got here is because we've been doing it all wrong. And we've been doing it all wrong because things like pride and ego have been feeding systems that are much bigger than any one of us. And we buy into it, right? In a very real sense. We make the choice to buy into it.
I'm going to come to James here in a second, but I just wanted to touch on this because everything you guys are talking about made me think about something I wrote down earlier, which was oral history. And I think to answer your question, James, I think that's where we started to lose this, and that all of the teachings, all of the historical ideas, and I want my ancestors to then do better than I did, right? We were always trying to put that next generation a little bit higher and like, oh man, I made all these mistakes. These next guys should do it better. We had that with oral history because, and it also, when you talk about Aristotle and these philosophers, these people used to speak in open forums, right? You just go out in the open and be like, hey, I got this idea. We're going to go do this stuff. And maybe we should, and people would challenge you. You would be held accountable to the point now where this is why I think podcasts are, kind of become the new medium is that it creates an environment that is an open forum. It creates an oral history. It creates us discussing ideas and being accountable to one another without having to physically be beside each other because the world is so vast nowadays. But I think that's one of the reasons we've gotten to the place where we are with all the issues and the judgments and the pride and all of the ego and all the stuff we've been talking about comes from the lack of oral history, from the lack of sitting down with elders like we used to do on the ranch, like I still do when I go down for branding. I sit around with all the old boys and we swap stories and they talk about stuff and I ask questions and we have an oral history. That's, I think, a big part of it. James, what are you thinking after hearing all of the answers from people?
Firstly, that was amazing. I mean, so many different perspectives. I gotta say, Gino's, articulation of all these thoughts is incredible. The way that, Seb's had this kind of journey that he's been on. And I want to say the being unaware of maybe the lack of goodness, that you are doing good things. It just reminds me completely of the functioning alcoholic, especially in my profession. Well, I can still drive the engine. I can still put the fire out, but it doesn't mean that you're doing it at the level that you should be able to. And you're kind of blind to it. So, but just to add to, I mean, all the amazing things, I'm so glad that, we got to this. So thank you for entertaining the question. To me, where I feel my whole fire for this purpose has come from is gratitude. Like I'm talking, I can see, I can hear, I can breathe. I have all four limbs, my family are healthy, touch wood as of now. So why wouldn't I have this burning desire to help other people when I have been blessed with this? I'm 51 years old. How many people didn't make it to 20, to 10, to 8? You know what I mean? So, but if you go back to, again, the way we're conditioned in schools, the way that we're just bombarded through our screens, even the kind of people that are put on the pedestal today versus Socrates, Aristotle, these great minds. And I mean that, both sides of the aisle, by the way. Where is that message of kindness and compassion and empathy and then gratitude? You're bombarded with, oh, James, you don't have enough. You only drive a Nissan Sentra. You could have a lifted 750 with, truck nuts in the back and you'll be even more of a man. And it's just constantly, we're being told we don't, which negates the gratitude conversation. And so I think if we can refine the gratitude of what we do have, because when people say, oh, America isn't this or that, I look out my window and the sun is shining, the sky is blue. There's this beautiful, I mean, all kinds of birds of prey flying. That's America, not the people on the TV screaming at each other. So I think if we can go back to realizing how fortunate we actually are, I think that then will force that, that kindness and compassion and empathy to start growing again. But if you feel like you're not doing enough because of this race or this gender or this, group of people, you constantly feel like you're owed something rather than you owe something to the world.
Okay, on this point, I got a question because it goes into what Seb was saying earlier, what you're saying, James and Gino. It talks about the imposition of faith. Okay, so is it possible to actually impose your faith on somebody else and have them not realize it? Because when I think about what you guys are talking about, that's what leadership is, right? If we want other people to live a glorious life, if we think our life is really good and we want them to do better, that's coaching, that's leadership, that's the development of the people around us, that's parenting, right? We're developing someone else to do better than us or to their best ability or but I have faith that person can do this thing because there's no physical way for me to prove that person can do that thing until I perhaps guide them, perhaps push them a little bit. So I want to talk a little bit about the imposition of faith, because this plays into some of the reasons, as you guys were talking about, what issues people have with fixed religions and the imposition of things and having to determine what's going to happen, et cetera. So Sean, what do you got? I see a smirk on your face.
Well, I'm smirking because I think you're just using the words wrong. The imposition of faith. As I've stated right from my get-go, faith is not religion and faith is not spirituality. There's overlap, but to me, faith is a personal, internal thing. Beyond me it turns into spirituality, the mysteries of the world. And within that, there are religions. There is a religious structure. So are you talking about faith? Are you talking about spirituality? Are you talking about religion? Or are you talking about all three blended?
I'm personally talking about faith. And the reason I do hear your distinctions, and the reason I'm saying faith is that you're a coach. And you guys are leaders. You guys have been on the ground doing the stuff, getting others to do things that you want them to do based on your faith that they're going to do it.
So, is using that as the example, using that structure of the words, and this ties back to something that was being discussed a little bit earlier, and that is my sense of religion. And I've got many forms of religion. One of my senses of religion is this moment. It is sharing ideas with other people. So my faith is what it is. My spirituality drags me into the world with curiosity, into the mysteries of the world. The religion of the moment is sharing ideas of values, sharing how does this morally impact this? How can I help? How can I not help? These kind of things are best done through a community, through a religion. And we'll call it the religion of leadership, the religion of betterment, the religion of give it a title. You're phrasing it up as, well, we do it as coaches or as leaders. I've done it as a coach, but that is not true. I didn't use faith. What I did use was a religion of coaching. And if it's leadership, then it's a religion of leadership. And so religion just doesn't mean a single thing. It just doesn't mean an institution to me. The religion of the matter is that third piece, that third position beyond faith and beyond spirituality. It is the construct, it is the framework, it is the idea that executes the solution. And so, back to your original question, I would reframe it as such that as a coach, my religion was ... not my faith. My faith was in me to deliver for the athlete, as it were, and some belief in the spiritual nature of the mysteries of the world that they're going to pick up what I'm putting down or not. And that'll be determined in the religion of leadership, which can be built out in many different ways. And so that didn't answer your question, I'm sure. It probably created more questions than answers. But I just want to be careful with my language, as it were.
I'm tracking. I'm loving this though, because you're right. I do have like 17 more questions running in my head, but I want to get everybody else's thoughts first. So, Gino, let's hit you. What do you got?
So here's the thing, right? So when we talk about the imposition of faith, I automatically go into this idea that it's being forced, right? And in the world of leadership, so how I define leadership, right? It's the ability to influence others to achieve a common objective, right? So if it's in that realm, can my faith influence others, right? Now, the answer to that is unequivocally yes, right? Now, why do I say that? What are we actually talking about, right? We're talking about, again, for me, it's the substance. It's the intangible substance of the identity, right, that I carry within the collective identity of who I am as a human being, right? The thing about that is that the intangible substance, faith in general, when we start talking about its relationship with confidence and with trust, look, politicians and politics in general do this all the time, right? They influence, right? They will garner a sense of faith, right? And the folks that are believing in them and what they're doing to achieve some semblance of an outcome. It can be great to bring people together. It can also be great to polarize, right? Communities, right? Because you're building off of that currency that is trust, right? Because it's built off of an intangible substance of belief, right? That is brought together with this consciousness that is layered in, right? Into the same thing. But in the world of imposition, yeah, it's a tough one, Chance, because I don't feel like I can impose my faith, or maybe that's not the right way of saying that. Maybe I can, maybe I do, but it's certainly not my intention, right? I don't ever want to impose, right, my faith. Imposing my will, right, that is a little bit of a different story depending on the circumstance that we're talking about. But the intangible substance that defines what it is and who it is that I am and what I stand for and what I believe, I'd like to think that there can be a very real influence, but I would not want to have an imposition, right? Because I want people to, if there's something that I am doing, right, that is positive, that is good, right, and people want to pick up some parts of that and can make it their own, awesome, great, right? Like I've done a good deed that day, right, even if it was unknowingly. But the idea of coercion, right, and forcing someone to think about something or feel a certain way, that is a different story. And I may be completely misinterpreting what you're asking, right? But that's the immediate kind of reaction from my end.
I left it ambiguous on purpose. So
Gotcha.
I wanted to see where each of you guys take on this, because the connotation of imposition is negative. But to, like, with parenting, you're imposing your will, your faith on your children. That's what parenting is. You're taking what I believe, and this is how I want life should run. And if you're going to live in my house, well, we're going to make the bed first thing in the morning. That's an imposition. I'm sure my kids tell me all the time they don't want to make their bed. But the connotation is negative because it does seem forceful, but it doesn't have to. So, which is, I just love where we're going with this. James, what do you got?
So what I wrote down, because I agree completely. When you impose, even in the child scenario, all right, you need to not shout at people. Do you hear? That's bad. Don't shout at people. And then you shout at someone in public. What does your kid think? Are they really buying into the don't shout at thing? If you're not actually walking the walk yourself, do as I say, not as I do. So I think that you've got two kind of equal and opposite paths. You've got impose. You've got a track coach, and he's screaming at everyone and he's running them into the ground. He's like, you will run the very first ever sub 4 minute mile. Is that person going to end up, achieving that high performance? I don't think so. Now Roger Bannister comes in and he just runs the 4 minute mile, and people watching Roger Bannister go, it can be done. I think inspiration can absolutely be passed on when it comes to faith, but imposition can't.
I'm digging this. Seb, what do you got?
Yeah, something along the exact same lines. I really didn't like the term imposition. Humans are contrarians to begin with. So even if somebody knew you had added value in something that you impose upon them, they won't do it just because you imposed it, right? And I think that when it comes to, say the leadership context, well, what defines you as a good leader? Do you define yourself as a good leader, or you don't? You don't get to make that call. You just simply don't. So what you need, then that means that you need buy-in. Right? And if you need buy-in, it doesn't come with imposition. It comes with actions. It comes with being the leader that you need to be doing it, and for them to be able to grasp all the intricacies of your leadership, not just extreme ownership and this other silo. There's a gazillion different intangibles in the leadership confines that people are going to pick up on, some consciously and others subconsciously. Right? And so again, when we talk about posture of the heart, this is where the great leaders are done. What is their actual posture of the heart? And that authenticity shines through, and they get buy-in. And the people that work for them, or the people that they lead, are wanting to follow. And so for me, I've never considered myself, even as a coach or in any context, as wanting to impose how I do things or wanting to impose what I feel about certain things. What I do is I present a case and I present an experience, and I match them both together, and I say, here's outcomes that we can, historically track, or here are some of the things that we know worked for us historically, or from a perhaps a knowledge standpoint, or a technical standpoint, for example, if there's technical knowledge involved, of course, in leadership as well. And so having that intersection of all those things creates buy-in. The buy-in is now the response to whether or not you're a good leader. And so I try to stay away from that as much as I can. Now, when it comes to faith, for example, for me right now, there's a lot of people tapping into me for questions about what I'm doing, right? But I don't talk openly about what I'm doing. Sean knows because he was here in my house, but nobody else does really, aside from a little post here and there, that I never used to do, simply because I wasn't comfortable to where I stood, whereas now I am. Right. And so the difference with this is when people tap into me wanting to know or asking some questions, I can only give them what I have found or what I've researched or what I have been convicted of, and all of those things. I can have those conversations. But really, the real teaching happens in how I live my life. How I live my life until, the end of times, and in my relationship with others, and in my integrity in relation to the values that I am adhering to or should. If I don't do that and I start straying from that, then there is no imposing anything. And that goes back to the example with the kids. And this feeds right into your chance about the kids, right? We all know the person that was forced to go to church as a kid for an extended period of time, to run away from the church as fast as they humanly could, as soon as their little legs, their hearts, and their bank account allowed them to. Right? And that is just the way that you might expect this happen to all the other concepts that you're trying to teach. So if you're ruling with an iron fist, but you're not demonstrating, you're not leading by example, they're not going to do what you say. They're going to do what you do, as James alluded to. And that's just the reality of parenting. They're going to replicate your behaviors, the subconscious one and the conscious ones, all of them, right? And that's why most people will say, I'll never be like my dad and I'll never be like my mom. They wake up at 40 and they're like, I'm exactly a carbon copy of that person. It happens to almost all of us. Tell me if it didn't happen to you, because it sure happened to me, and I didn't have that, but I knew sort of, potentially what he kind of stood for and things. And I look at it and I'm like, okay, those are some of the things that even without his influence, I still, and I'm sure there's obviously, biology in this and science and all of the things. But the reality is, if you have this in addition to the influence of the person directly in front of you doing instead of saying, imagine how powerful that might be.
I am digging this a lot, and I really wanted to touch on that question specifically because I like the connotation of imposition, and I wanted us to I wanted to engage in a little bit of contention. I wanted us to think a little bit where you had to wait a second, I'm not quite down with that. Sean, what do you got?
So on imposition, I think there should be some imposition, but it should be you imposing on yourself. You should create some imposition on yourself. Like when, as Seb said, and I loosely framed it up. I tried not to give away any secret sauce on what Seb's up to, so it was very vague. But something I'll say which will feel a bit contentious, but it does set a framework. And I said it earlier in a different way, maybe a little more vague. I'll be a little more specific now. My world that I have wrapped around me, that I self-select, or that enters into my world unannounced that I don't self-select, that's my religion. Like Seb is part of my religion. He creates a form of religiosity. He creates a certain, he injects something into my life, just in that tiny little thread of his emerging pursuit of religion that wasn't there a few years ago, but is there now and will continue to be for some time. And as people enter and exit my life, they bring things with them, sometimes leave things behind, and then sometimes move on. And that, in a sense, is my religion. The world creates my structure of my understanding of the faith in myself based on a pattern of positive outcomes that I can begin to trust, and the mystery of the world dragging me further down the path of curiosity and wanting to serve at a higher level. I don't know what all of this means, but I do know this, that I surround myself intentionally with the people that help me understand it better and do it better. And in essence, that is a form of a tiny little religion, a structured approach to wanting to better understand the mysteries of the world through certain tenets or certain actions, or holding you accountable at a higher level than you do yourself. And so I don't have the 10 Commandments in front of me. I've got a guy called Seb who constantly irritates me to do better. You know what I'm saying? But in the best way for me. And so I think everyone's got to find their way, keep their eyes open to the possibilities of the mysterious world that we live in, and create a definition for yourself initially. And whatever that definition means to you, it will evolve. It will ebb and flow. It will grow and it will break and perhaps reform itself. But when it's all said and done, if you're right now feeling like you're not a good person and you're not living a good life and you're not being a positive influence within society, if you're listening to this right now and you're just hitting yourself with a whole bunch of negatives, find any religion, your own personal construction or an already constructed one that is going to lead you in a better direction.
I have a question on this, and when you were talking, Sean, it made me really think about doubt and how kind of important doubt is in our own, not so much in our own faith, but in the development of our own faith. And I'm using your definition of like your own belief in yourself. And I've been using belief and faith in my own head as kind of like interchangeable. When I think of faith, I feel that it is about belief. I believe in myself. I believe in that person. I believe in et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm wondering what your guys' thoughts are on doubt being a required part of faith, in that we have to doubt our capabilities to then test it, to then build the experience so that we can continue to build faith in and of itself. And whether or not that doubt is actually a sign of growth rather than just kind of that going back to that blind faith concept versus rational thought. Do you think doubt is required for faith?
If I've screwed it up till now, if I've been not like super clear or if I've misled anyone, when I say I've got faith in myself, it means I believe in myself to take the moment directly in front of me, operate in that liminal space for a microsecond, and then choose the right thing, the positive thing, do the good thing. So I look at the problem. I have faith that I'm going to choose a positive outcome rather than a negative outcome. Do your best. And so that is my faith in myself, to constantly look at the problem in front of me and keep choosing the right branching decision that is the positive branching decision, irrespective of where that takes me. It's eventually over time going to take me in the right direction. And to your question, the faults, the flaws, the mistakes, the errors, freaking guaranteed they're going to happen 9 times out of 10. But I'm always going to choose positive rather than negative in that binary liminal space moment of if this, then that, or left or right.
I take it. James, what do you got?
So it's interesting. I'm going to kind of answer both the questions there, the previous one as well a little bit. But when you've got faith and doubt, the doubt can be absolutely healthy. And I'll give you an example. After 1,100 interviews, many of whom were in crisis or even suicidal, some even went through their own attempt and survived. One of the least discussed elements of mental health is the miswiring of the brain, the distortion of reality. When someone has the perfect storm of elements that contribute to suicide ideation, that they truly believe that they are a burden to the very people that they love. So what keeps most people healthy is if they get close to that, there's still the doubt, like, hey, that's not right. But when you get someone fully in crisis, and then let's say, for example, you add a few, shots of whiskey to it, and now that's dulled even more, that becomes faith in the wrong thing. So I think the doubt can be even life-saving sometimes, questioning your very reality at that moment, because, as we talked about, physiologically is the base of the pyramid, as Gino was saying. Well, you can distort that physiology through TBIs and sleep deprivation and all the other things. So I think there is a place to, the blind faith, as we talked about, can sometimes lead you down the wrong path. You swear that everything on CNN or Fox is 100% correct. You probably need some doubt in your life, So I think that they can be healthy. But then going back to, on a positive note, we're talking about imposing versus inspiration. How often has the mental health conversation up till arguably not even 10 years ago been, What is wrong with you? Just pull yourself together, suck it up. And how many times did that result in losing one of our incredible men, women, or children on this planet? Versus what I have seen, this courageous vulnerability, this storytelling, where someone has gone through their own crucible, come out the other side. And to go to Sean's point, if we're really talking about faith, it's the actual belief within the person, their individual conversation with the universe, with their God, whoever it is, their faith. How do you ignite that flame again? And you listen to a soldier, a sailor, a police officer, a firefighter, whoever, that was right at that point. And it might have been a God moment or a dog moment. Who knows what it was, but something stopped them and they began their own journey of healing. And someone, it's an interview in Kansas, and someone in South Africa or Nepal listens to this, because that's the beauty of podcasts. You can listen if you understand English and you have Wi-Fi, and they go, oh my God, that's me. You've just restored the faith that's burning in the individual by your own journey. That's not imposing. Imposing is shame and guilt, which puts people into the ground. But inspiring by someone seeing themselves in another person, as we went all the way around to the beginning of the conversation, another person is the most important thing. I think now you can actually literally restore faith in an individual through your own courageous journey.
Man, I am digging this so much. Gino, what do you got?
Man, there is a German philosopher, Paul Tillich, and he said, doubt is not the opposite of faith, right? It's an element of faith. And I think that is very, very significant here, especially with what it is that James just said, because, you know, when you are in a position, right, where let's say you live a life of no doubts, right? No questions whatsoever, right? And it's just blinders on and go. I think you're negating a really important element of the human condition. And I think we're supposed to be exploratory. We're supposed to be investigative, right? We're supposed to ask questions, right? That's why we have this ability to achieve self-actualization, taking it back to Maslow's, right? Like, you know, you get to the top of that pyramid, you have all these things that get satisfied, right? Now, what do you do, right? And then also what makes us so incredibly unique and special as a species here on this planet, right? That puts us in a position of dominance, right? Amongst all the other species that exist on this planet. But I think doubt is it's a healthy thing, right? And it's a healthy thing in the sense of self-doubt, right? And we can make this argument can go both ways, but I think it's a very important thing to constantly question yourself while also maintaining the faith in the fundamentals of who you are and in the mental models that establish the foundation of your identity, but then also the possibilities of what could be for that identity, right? And I think that's a really important thing, because that's where the elements of growth come into play. But if I cannot find that the crevices, the little cracks along the way to plant some fertilizer and plant some seeds and now grow some things, right? And I just think this slab, this foundation, that is me, it is solid as a rock. There are no cracks whatsoever. And I don't go looking for those cracks, which means there's imperfection, right? Which that's exactly what doubt will do, right? You're doing yourself a massive disservice. On the same token, if you live in that crack all the time, that's very dangerous. It's very dangerous, right? You have to be able to pull yourself out and look at the 40,000 foot view and be like, that's a good slab, right? It's not perfect, but it's a good slab, right? Knowing that those imperfections are there, which are kind of wrapped in that paper of doubt, if that makes sense.
Oh, I'm tracking. Seb, what do you got?
Yeah, and that's not a fixed process. That needs to be reassessed consistently
always.
In light of the circumstances. And I think a lot of the times we look at something and then, that could be anything. It could be physically looking at something inside the house or saying, I'm going to change the, baking soda in 3 weeks, and 3 months later or 3 years later, you grab the baking soda and you're like, oh man, I even put a date on there, but I never looked back. Right. And I think that's a mistake that we make as humans when we self-assess, is we self-assess in light of our current circumstances, totality of the circumstances here. And then 6 months down the line, our circumstances are completely changed, but we look at our fundamental being as being the exact same. And that's a problem. When it comes to doubt, when it comes to questioning, when it comes to any of those, well, if we acknowledge that, and if we agree that the definition is without proof, then doubt has to be a part of it, because then where's the doubt coming from is if it's infallible, right? I guess so there has to be. But more importantly, I think one of the things that really, really scares people is when they start doubting what they feel or what they think is right. It's normal. Like, we have this constant fight between the flesh and the soul. Like, we actually do. Our cognitive mind and our brain is trying to make sense of some things that are extremely complex, and we're trying to rationalize them so that they become tangible. We can see and touch them. And then we're fighting against the fact that we know that there's an underpinning of spirituality, of things that are unseen and unheard that are affecting the outcome. And we're fighting against that idea. And so, is it normal for doubt to creep in? Absolutely, it's normal for doubt to creep in. What you do with the doubt creeping in is what is relevant, not irrelevant. It's of extreme relevance. There was on what James was talking about. So if we look at the mental health crisis, and so this is where I have an issue with the way that we do things sometimes as humans. So what we do is we do something. It leads us down a certain path. And we realize that this path absolutely isn't working for us. So what we do is we take it and we go to complete opposite, because that's bound to work out. Like, that is going to work. But the issue is, so now let's talk about what we have now. So James was alluding to the fact that, 20 years ago, 10, even potentially a little bit longer, I don't know, I'm losing track of time. There is a by Gino, there is a possibility that we were the burden of wellness was imposed on the individual. What are you doing or not doing, and all of those things. Then we took it completely from that, and we went to wellness is everybody else's responsibility. I have zero say in that. It's the supervisors, it's the managers, it's the government, it's all of these things. So now you're downloading responsibility for wellness. And now we create what? Victimhood, right? So we've created a society of victims. And what happens when you're in victimhood? You proliferate victimhood. It's never going to stop. It's a never-ending battle. You'll always consistently be victimized in whatever you take on, because your entire lens is covered with victimhood. And so I think that when we look at the mental health conversation, and being in Mental Health Month is very really relevant for this conversation, is that where is the balance here? Where is the ownership that I have over doing certain things? When you're talking to somebody and you say, hey, what if, I've tried everything. Okay, did you go out today? Did you work out? Did you eat nutritious food? Did you sleep well? The list goes on and on and on. We're all familiar with these concepts. The answer is always no. No, not really. Oh, no, my food hasn't been the greatest. So what actually have you done for your wellness? Nothing, right? And I'm not suggesting you're not in a bad place. I'm suggesting that definitely should have been done before you were in a bad place, but now we're playing catch up. That's okay. Let's change one thing at a time. But that concept of ownership that was imposed before in a unhealthy way can be imposed in a healthy way to help change the outcome on the other side. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
I'm tracking. I really love the fact that we're able to do this and get into this deep conversation. We got somebody on the Instagram side, I can't pronounce her name, says, thank you for the deep, meaningful reflections and sharing of information. Left me really pondering some deep notions. And this was my goal from this conversation. When I got it set up, when Seb, you gave Sean the idea, and Sean hit me up and said, hey man, this is what we got to get set up. And I put the guest list together, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. What I really want to do is get people to think. That's my whole goal. And on that note, Gino's here. He just jumped back in. He was having some storm trouble, so he's back in and good to go.
Storm in Florida, never heard of.
Right?
Imagine. Yeah, I'm Wi-Fi, but I'm using cell phone, so hopefully the signal's strong enough and we'll be able to roll.
Raj, I love it. Well, we appreciate you jumping back in here. It's always good to have you on for this whole thing. Now, I really wanted to talk about, we've talked about faith, we've talked about doubt, we've talked about all these things, but I think one of the things that we keep touching back on is that it is a personal and community struggle. It's kind of an intermingling of the two. So Sean, using your definitions, it's like the mixture of faith and spirituality, that crossover link. And to James' interjecting question about, how do we How do we engage people? How do we build people up? How do we develop others to have faith in themselves, to have faith in their community, so on and so forth, to really rebuild that sense of togetherness, which, you know, we've lost. It's pretty easy to see when you look around that we've lost a concept of togetherness. How do we keep doing it? How do we develop those around us with, like we were talking about earlier, without imposing, without telling people what they need to do? Gino, I'm going to hit you first, just in case your internet goes out.
So there's some part that we lost. You guys tracking me?
Cutting in and out and jumping around here. I'm going to come back to you in a second. Sean, what do you got? I can see you got a smirk on your face.
I'm just loving the comms problems. So simply state your question.
How do we solve the issue? How do we develop the people around us so that they can develop the people around them, so that they can develop the people around them, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, I think we've already discussed that. It's simply a matter of doing your best and having other people emulate your positive direction to some degree. I mean, if you're a jerk, you know, do better. And if you're doing better, then you can be emulated. And that's as simple as it gets. How to do that? Well, that's just an entirely another podcast, I suppose, which we absolutely don't have time for. So as we're heading towards like wrapping up the show, I suppose, and because I can't hit that very long, complex question.
How about just one then? How about just one? Give me a physical, something somebody could do today to help them build their faith in themselves. How about that?
Right. You know, I'm going to go with that cliche or that trope, and that is make your freaking bed. And so it's really just it's a proxy for do better in your day. And by that, I mean, like, do something as well as you can, create an outcome that is positive, and then put that notch on your belt for the day. Get as many notches on your belt as you can. Now you've got a consistent delivery of positive outcomes that day. If you've hit double-digit outcomes that are positive, now you can have a little bit of faith in yourself. Day after day, week after week, year after year, that consistent delivery of positive outcomes will help teach you to have faith in yourself. You can't really have faith in yourself if you are always inconsistent and rarely produce the positive outcomes that you're seeking. And so, to create faith, you need to produce positive outcomes on a consistent basis for yourself. That has got nothing to do with the external version of faith. So, there you go. Simple answer to a bonkers long question.
You know me, I like to really extend these questions as far as I can. Gino, let's try you again. What do you got?
All right, so I put this in the chat in case you guys hear me, right? So when it comes to cohesion, there's 3 C's that I'll provide. First and foremost, it's communication, right? So healthy communication. Now, how we define that ethnographic implications, who you're talking to, and what your value system is. But healthy communication leads, right, to communion. What is communion? Sharing, right? How?
Sorry, Doc Gino, you're getting a bit janky
right,
here.
man.
I've tried my best, but I'll read out what you got written here. You got the 3 C's of community, cohesion that I use. Appropriate communication facilitates healthy communion. Healthy communion builds community. Community equals sharing. Not religious. It's all about the quality and depth of communication you have with yourself first, then others, which I dig. 100% communication is key. Seb, what do you got?
Yeah, for me, it almost always goes back to the same thing, and that's the concept of introspection and meaningful introspection. I'm not talking about, you know, looking back and sort of guessing whether or not. So it has to be a real long tracking history to help yourself understand how many times you've taken credit for things you shouldn't have taken credit for, and that's where faith comes in, right? Mm-hmm. So I started as a baby, you know, and some of the things, some of my behaviors and some of the celebration post X, Y, and Z, just to see where I injected myself in lieu of something that was unseen and unheard, right? Whatever that is irrelevant. Whatever it is to me, it can be something completely different to you, but ultimately we'll call it the universe for the sake of everybody can agree on that, right? In one way or another. And so I would say building faith has more to do with realizing how you got where you are. You know, we're having a mental health conversation earlier, and I'm going to say something a bit controversial, but you need to sit with it for a bit. You know, mental ailment is a luxury of the living. It's that simple. Like nobody else has, you know, that we know of at least, has the sort of the, what's the word? The gift of struggling in this life. That means that you're alive. And for as long as you're alive, there is hope. And for as long as you believe that there is a way out, no matter how dark your situation gets, right? And so I think that once we start reframing, once we start really understanding how gratitude should be applied absolutely against everything that we do and say and that we live by, as alluded to by James earlier, now we start changing the landscape. Then we start looking internally at to how many times have I gotten bailed out by, say, the universe or by unseen forces or things that were completely impossible statistically speaking, and somehow I'm here anyways, right? And so now you start creating a pattern of having the ability to induce faith where there is no clear-cut answer. And this is the way forward for you.
Bam. James, any thoughts?
I was going to just quickly say, it looks like Gino's internet connection is good. Do you want to try again with Gino first?
We can try for sure, Gino. You want to jump in?
You guys got me? Am I good? Do I sound like a computer?
Hey, you're good.
All right. It was coming super like in and out on my end. All right. So what's the question? Sorry.
The question is, how do we solve for X? How do we build belief in ourselves? How do we build belief in others? How do we build that?
Yeah, man.
For X?
So that's like the 40,000 foot view, big question of all times, right? I mean, like to me, it's a question of quality and depth of relationship you have with yourself will always define the upper limit of the quality and depth of relationship you can have with somebody else. And the whole point of faith and having tribe and community and all those things, right, is to be able to go through the best of times and the worst of times together and maintain that cohesion and really see all the goodness that exists as a human being, right, on this planet, in this life, right, and be able to have each other as witnesses to that and support mechanisms to that. So, you know, I think I heard Seb say it's about introspection, and that's kind of where it starts, and I couldn't agree more. I think if you don't have your compass in alignment, right, with where it needs to be as far as what your North Star, what is your North Star? Like start with defining that, right? What paints the picture on that blank canvas that is your life, to be able to get a deeper understanding of the substance, right, that is within, and the things that will lead to possibilities that you don't have evidence of right now, right? But you don't need it. All you need is the belief that it will be there one day. And if you have the right mindset and the right people around you, that is exactly what you need to make that a reality.
Bam. James, what do you got?
So I'll lean into the, if you want to change the world, start at home philosophy, because I think that's it. What is one of the biggest issues that we have? If they just stop doing this, if they would do their job, if they blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with the person in the mirror, like looking yourself in the eyes and saying, as we've alluded, you know, everyone's kind of touched different areas of this. How am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
Am I walking the walk? Because again, I can tell my kids all day long, you need to go exercise. But if I'm in a lazy boy and I'm eating Cheetos all day, am I walking the walk? So beginning with that, then mentoring the people that you can affect, being, a present partner, being a present parent, you know, trying to walk the walk so your kids are like, oh, I guess exercise is normal. Oh, I guess eating, good food is normal. And now you've created, a family of kind, compassionate human beings. And then you step out your front door and you look around at your community and you go, who else can I help? I'm an electrician. I'm a swim coach. I'm a, whatever it is. Who can I positively affect? Because the problem is you hear all these stories of these people. And we got to really understand, and I just wrote a book about this, generational trauma is real. You can't say, well, the problem today is these broken homes. Like, yes, you're right. So what are you going to do to fix it? Mom is, dead. Dad's in jail of these certain groups. And this poor little 8-year-old is just wondering, which way to go. Is it you or is it the gangbanger? You get to make that choice. You get to put yourself in front of that kid and steer them the right way. It doesn't have to be that acute of an example. Maybe, mom and dad are working all hours just to make ends meet in this crazy dynamic that we've created where 2 incomes still barely covers the mortgage. And so now maybe you're that kind, compassionate teacher or caretaker or whatever it is. Be a mentor in your community. And circling around to faith, this is going to sound like some QVC commercial, but I am going to make Kinder into a TV show, and there's going to be an accompanying docuseries, and it is going to put hope back into as many people as I can reach, so that everyone watching this, unlike the Tiger King that just goes, oh, well, my life's better than that guy, I don't have to fix anything. It'll be the opposite. Whoever it is, whatever those deficits are, obesity, addiction, shame, guilt, whatever, they're going to look in the mirror and go, why can't I start? And we're going to give them some tools to begin their journey. And spirituality would definitely be one of the areas that we'll cover, moral injury and all these other areas. So I have faith in the fact that I can pass that faith and hopefully inject it into all these people. And again, going to Seb's point, it's not me. I'm sitting here now because of 51 years of amazing human interactions, positive and negative, and this amazing resource that I've got to be a sponge for. So going back to that, to me, faith is also hope. I think it's the same thing. How do you inspire hope into those people that A, they can overcome the things that they're struggling with, and B, they can then be a beacon of light in their own family, community, country, and ultimately planet.
I love it. I go back to oral history, right? This is part of the reason why I like podcasting so much. The reason why I love the collective specifically is this is oral history. This is open forum. This is discussion. This is physical. I have to speak my mind. I have to do that in front of other people who are going to question everything that I say. And I think that is part of the, as you said, communication is such a critical thing. The more people that get involved in this, the more people that are capable of building themselves to a point that they can then eloquate their position and be open enough to engage in that discussion, the better off people are going to be. Now we are over 2 hours now. I can't thank you guys enough. This has just been fantastic conversation. So Gino, James, Seb, Sean, thank you guys. This has just been awesome. Any final thoughts, anything at all on faith, on anything that we've covered so far, anything burning in the back of your brain at all? Seb, I'm going to start with you. What do you got?
Yeah, it was a very enlightening conversation, guys. Thank you so much for that. For giving us the opportunity to do that here in a place where we normally actually do not, or stray away from that, right? One thing I would say is, and this has been the case in my journey, and I'm not taking it necessarily on the religious based faith, but it applies there too. You are going to produce the evidence that you want to see unless you are open to look at other evidence, right? So when I look at something, and when I research something, and when I look at something, I try to look at the other side of what I believe. Show me the other side of what I believe first, And so then it sort of, for lack of a better term, it dilutes. Imagine if my belief was wine and I take water and I put a little bit in it. It kind of opens me up to the conversations, whether or not I believe fully what it is that I'm seeing, which is contrary to what I fundamentally believe. It's going to open my mind to the possibility of, because unfortunately we're cognitively biased by nature, and it's very, very hard for us not to do that. And so start looking at the things that you don't believe, which is precisely what I did. Looking at the things that I didn't believe, looking at the arguments, the counter arguments to the arguments I was making for years in rationalistic mindset. Okay. And so at the end of the day, you may not end up where I am, and you may not end up where Sean is. It really doesn't matter. You're going to end up where you ought to end up in relation to the work that you have done. But being aware of that is a superpower, and applying it up or weaponizing it for your good is even more of a superpower.
Bam. Gino, what do you got?
You know, for me, it's a question of hope, right? So faith being the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, right? So start with what you're hopeful for, right? When you think about tomorrow, what are you hopeful for, right? I mean, are you hopeful for waking up in the morning and kind of going back to the idea of gratitude, right? What James was like, what are you grateful for? What are you hopeful for that's going to continue, right, into tomorrow, next week, and the next month, and so on? And then work backwards, right? When you have that list of all the things that you're hopeful for, how do they come together to define the substance that is you, right? Because that is what you are taking into the next day, and that is the ripple effect that you are creating from a collective consciousness perspective with those that are in your tribe, right? And that ultimately defines the character of who you are and how it is that folks will interpret what it is that you represent and what you stand for.
Bam. I love it. James, what do you got?
I think all I would say was just to layer on what everyone said, just start today. Like whatever it is, start today. Whether it's, what is missing, am I going to question things? I love that. Tim Ferriss had a businessman from, I think it was Argentina, and he talked about Argentina, not Argentina. He talked about the 3 whys. And I love that as far as figuring out, does something make sense? So as I alluded to earlier, well, firefighters work 56 hours. Well, why? Because we've always done it that way. Well, why? Well, because they used to fight fires and that was it, and they got once a month. All right. Is that the way it still is? No. So there's an opportunity to change. Humans need water. Why? Well, because we're made up completely of water. Why? And then you go into the physiology. Okay, humans do need water. That is an absolute truth. So question, your beliefs. So, whether it's going down a journey of a discovery or really facing the beginning of that thing that you've been struggling with, start today. Like going back to Seb's point, I'm a huge, proponent of environment and individualism, ownership. Obesity is a crisis in this country. Are we surrounded by, great food and, lots of exercise? No. So environment plus ownership equals result. So again, just to analyze what is it that you can control, but don't put it off. Take that first tiny step today, whether it's leaving your phone at home and walking the dog, whether it's downloading Headspace, whether it's going to visit a particular spiritual place that's always interested you. But until you take that first step, you're never going to go. Every waterfall begins with a single drop of water.
Bam. I love it. Sean, any final thoughts?
So start building some faith within yourself, whatever that means to you. Focus on some faith internally. Then allow the external world, the mysteriousness of the external world, the things that you don't understand yet and may never, allow yourself to be dragged into that curious place, the spirituality of the world. And as for religion, as I've already stated, the world that I've got wrapped around me is my religion through self-choice, or it's being imposed upon me. My friend Seb, did he show up because I selected him? Or did he show up because he selected to show up? Or was it just the universe? Was it a god? What was it? Who knows? I don't know. I really don't know. But something shouldn't be questioned. Something should just be experienced and learned from, which is precisely what I do in my life. As to, I guess, why? What's it all mean? Why are we even here? That's the question that is yet to be asked in this podcast, which of course is an entirely different podcast right at the end. Why are we even here? For me, I think that my faith in my ability to do good at scale has been refined month by month sometimes, not just year by year, sometimes week by week. And my belief in the mysteries of the world allowed me to believe that I can serve at a higher level through my friends, through writing a book, co-authoring a book with another dude called Seb, who's in my life for a reason. who strips away some of my cognitive biases as another sound voice in my ear. And I think I'll end it off with, I come away from this podcast richer, but I come away with more questions than answers.
I think that's the way we're supposed to do it. We come away with more questions than answers. And to the point of your guys' book, I'm midway through chapter 6, and I'm going to tell you right now, this thing is going to do so much good for so many people. I cannot wait for you guys to put it out, because I'm not going to go too deep into it, but outstanding. My only final thought on this is the same thing I say every day. Learn, build, grow. We learn about ourselves. We learn about our own faith. We learn about all these things. That allows us to build on those ideas, which allows us to grow and repeat the cycle. Learn, build, grow. We'll see you all next week. Gino. Thanks everybody for watching and being part of the collective. If this has sparked any thoughts or resonated with you, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us grow and keeps the conversation going. We'll see you all next time.